Our next guest is pulling back the curtain on what he says are the lies fueling America's dysfunction and giving us the tools he says we need to fix our broken political system. He's a George Washington University assistant professor, former congressional staffer, and author of the new book, We Hold These Truths: How to Spot the Myths That Are Holding America Back. Please welcome Casey Burgat. Hey, it's so good to see you.
You too.
And I have to brag, you've become a friend of mine in the process of this book because I did contribute a chapter to it.
Absolutely.
You heavily assisted me in it, though.
No.
You and I both worked in government. A lot of average Americans just don't understand the way government is supposed to work. And right now, I think something a lot of folks are thinking about is seeing in the second Trump term tremendous executive overreach. The historic number of executive orders signed, sort of pushing back and saying he may or may not follow what the courts rule. Was this foreseeable, and were there precedents that kind of set the stage for this beforehand?
It's absolutely foreseeable, not only because he is, how do we say, want to do more and not really care about precedent. In fact, that's kind of his moniker and what his supporters like about him, that he's willing to break a system which many people are frustrated with. And so this is kind of the final boss of what you get when you have people who run against the system to try to take over the system. And so with executive overreach, we have seen presidents and presidents increasingly use them to legislate from the Oval Office. And that is exactly not how it's supposed to work. And so Trump is different in a lot of ways, but he is purposefully going after things that he knows other branches of government are supposed to do. And it really sets us up for a system where you are very vulnerable to the president at hand, right? You may love what he's doing right now. You may say that it's necessary and long overdue, but that means you're necessarily signing up for the next guy, the person you fundamentally disagree with, coming back harder against you. So be careful what you wish for.
Right. Well, I think a big part of that is Congress in many ways ceding a lot of its power to the executive branch. What could Congress actually do right now, if it even had the appetite to push back on executive overreach from the White House?
This is one of the many frustrations for a lot of folks, is that you hear people crying about process and saying executive overreach or he shouldn't be doing that, only when you disagree with him. But when he's your person, when he's your guy doing things that you've wanted for you, like, that's awesome. Go ahead, man. Keep going. And that creates a fundamental disconnect between how the system is supposed to work and the longevity and the trust in our institutions. Because right now, we have people taking advantage of the lack of civic knowledge that people have about the system, where they're going in and saying, these people don't know any better, and I'm actually going to use their frustration as a means of me gaining power and doing what I want, even if it's exactly opposite to how the system is supposed to work. And so you mentioned you work in government. Not only government, but for the president, who right now is using more and more executive orders to do more and more things. So I'm curious, you wrote the chapter on the myths of presidential power, and I'm curious, what conversations did you have inside that first Trump administration about, like, yeah, maybe this is Congress's role, but maybe we can get it done today, and is that good politics for us?
It's such a fascinating question because I think, and I've said this many times on The View, the second Trump term is vastly different than the first. And there was overreach in the first, but there was sort of these rules of the road and norms with people who are around him of, no, that's going to be Congress's job. Let me work with Mitch McConnell if you want to get that done. We don't need to do it by executive authority. And I think that he, in many ways, learned from what he considered things that held him back in the first term. These past 4 years, he's been down in Mar-a-Lago and he's been thinking, what do I need to do to get done what I wasn't able to do before? And it's pushing the powers of the executive branch. It's challenging the courts when you can. It's bypassing Congress at basically every turn and trying to really govern from the executive. So I can picture many times that folks around him were like, we can get this done, but let's do it within the institutions as they exist.
And you think that's not, those conversations are not happening anymore?
I think there's no appetite for it. And to your point, if Republicans in Congress and Republicans serving around him are okay with it because it's their guy and it's their policy outcomes, what's the reason not to? But I always say this back to folks to Republicans, if Barack Obama was doing this by executive order, would you approve of it? And it's just the precedent it sets matters.
100%. And here's what people are watching from Congress right now, and any potential candidate coming in next time are saying, like, man, this position it was always powerful. It was always the most powerful position in the world. But now I get to legislate too.
It's much more powerful.
And so this precedent is going to continue on.
Exactly. Well, one of the myths that you write about is the idea that term limits will fix a broken Congress. Pew Research found that 87% of Americans support congressional term limits, but you actually say that they exacerbate political polarization. And I agree with you after reading your chapter, but please explain.
Nice, I got one. And I'm even afraid to look at the audience right now because almost all of them, I'm sure, want term limits because it's a simple equation, right? Congress sucks, it's ineffective. The only thing we can do is kick out all the people who make it suck and ineffective. Makes sense, except for when you realize that there is no school for being a member of Congress. This is a job where you cannot just go in part-time. Like on a Tuesday, they have to vote on healthcare subsidies, ethanol, Bitcoin. They have to oversee the executive branch if they choose to want to that day. Maybe Ukraine funding. This is a Tuesday. Who of us can go do that, right? And especially thinking of it as a part-time job, this isn't something that you just go in and try your hand at. And so for the political polarization argument, that we have so few competitive elections right now, right? Like the historically small number of seats where we don't know who's going to win 2 years from now, independent of who the candidate is, right? We know what party's going to win. And so the faster you churn those people out, those elections are won in the primaries, where only 15% of voters turn out. And if you're showing up to a political primary, you are the most ardent, polarized partisans that we have. So you are effectively choosing those who will ultimately go to DC. And the faster you churn out those moderates, the ones we were just talking about, they're going to be replaced with more extreme versions of that political party.
Yeah, no, very well said. Well, in this era of political polarization and also just distrust in our institutions, how do you get Americans to actually care about our democratic institutions and feel like they have an impact on them day to day? Because I feel like in the election, it was democracy's on the ballot, democracy's on the ballot, and it didn't seem like it broke through. Exactly.
This is a kind of an intangible thing that I struggle with, not only in the classrooms, but in just everyday conversations where people say, yeah, it matters, but not as much as my gas prices or not as much as my egg prices. And I'm sympathetic to that argument. But the reality is that if we don't engage, that's a decision in and of itself, right? Like you are to never forget in politics, if you're not willing to use your voice, someone is more than willing to use it for you. And you don't get to say how far they'll go or what they care about that day. So disengaging is the exact wrong process. And it doesn't have to be that you can't convince yourself that doom scrolling is convincing you that you are civically engaged. Show up to a school council meeting. Who are your elected members of Congress? Who are the people who are representing you at the local levels, the levels that will actually impact your everyday lives? This is not a part-time sport. It is not a hobby. We need to stop talking about it as such, but actually do what is required of us. So there's a trade-off here that if you want the freedoms, if you want the government that represents you, then that means that you are necessarily have to be an active participant in it.
Well, you mentioned local government. I always tell people, if you're disillusioned with national politics, start state and local, where it really impacts you the most, and that's where you can affect the most change in the quickest fashion. Before we go, there's an exciting initiative you're doing tied to this book. Can you tell us about it?
Absolutely. So if you've ever heard or have ever thought or have ever said that we need more civic engagement, more civic knowledge in this country, and I hope everyone here at some level does, we want to put our money where our mouth is, right? Like only 1/3 of the American people know that there's 3 branches of government. That is a failure. That is an absolute failure for a lot of reasons we don't have time for to talk about today. But the only thing we can do is try to reverse it, to do our part. And so what we're doing is trying to put this book into classrooms across America, in libraries across America, where these conversations can actually happen at an age before they become voters, right? So right now we just say you turn 18, go vote. And your vote counts the same as mine, same as yours, the same as the President of the United States. And so what we need to do is train students to become active participants. It doesn't just happen on day one, just like a language or science. This is something that needs to be learned and used. These muscles need to be flexed. And we want to get this book in classrooms across America. And teachers say that they want it too.
Casey, it's wonderful to have you. Thank you for joining us. And you can buy We Hold These Truths, How to Spot the Myths That Are Holding America Back Wherever Books Are Sold, or by scanning the QR code on your screen. Have a great day.